So how much does, eating pasta and ice cream for a week, for example, if you're going to Italy, have an effect on long-term microbiome health? Hello and welcome to today's episode of What We Tell Our Daughters. Today we're traveling, we're in Madrid, and I have been eating differently than I normally eat for the last few days, definitely a lot more sugar. So I thought we would dive into the topic of traveling and the microbiome, and more specifically, short-term dietary changes and their effect on the microbiome. Because probably everyone has had at some point or heard of traveler's diarrhea, where your microbiome is experiencing a big shift as soon as you go somewhere new. Maybe you have a lot of diarrhea. You might even have some gut pain. And that is one form of a shift in the microbiome. But there's also this collection of other people who don't actually have any physical changes. So they might not notice that they have any more bloating or gas or a change in bowel movements or anything like that. And so I was curious, are we still having changes in the microbiome, and what are those doing to our body? Then the other part, the other side to this coin is just eating differently for a number of days or weeks or even months sometimes, how much that has an effect on our gut overall. So let's dive into it. The first thing I want to talk about is just that short-term shift in eating. So how much does, eating pasta and ice cream for a week, for example, if you're going to Italy, have an effect on long-term microbiome health? And what the research shows is that in a short period of time, so if you're, basically a week of a dietary change, you will have a change in your microbiome, but it won't be a long-lasting change. So you might feel different because we know just how much of an effect the microbiome has on how we feel. And you may notice that you're more sluggish, you're more fatigued. Maybe you even notice immune system changes, like maybe you get sick while you're on vacation, something like that, because of that shift in the microbiome. And we're going to talk about specifically what's happening when we eat more sugar and we eat less of our complex carbohydrates and fiber. But basically, in the short term, we're not having any long lasting changes, which is a really great thing, especially when we're thinking about our kids traveling, because that's another thing that was coming to my mind is, if we're on vacation and we're letting our daughter eat a lot more sugar than normal, how much of an effect is this going to have on her microbiome? And are there things that I can be doing to help shift that or make sure that that's not a long-term change for her, that she comes back to her set point? So this is good news. This means that, maybe it's a short-lived thing, probably not going to be a big difference, make a big difference for us in the long term. On the other side of that, we do now know that it does take quite a while for the microbiome to make long-lasting changes. So that means if you're working on your gut actively, or you do have known gut issues or pain or anything like that, then it's going to take usually months of consistent changes and consistent work on your gut to really see those long-lasting changes in the microbiome. So let's talk a little bit about what the specific shifts are that's happening. We have two main groups of bacteria in our gut, and we call those the bacteroids and the firmicutes. And those are two that we're always kind of trying to balance the two of them. The bacteroids are known to be more prominent when we have a strong, healthy gut. So, in a well adapted, healthy gut where the immune system is functioning well, and we know that mood is controlled and everything seems to be working, we have a more prominent collection of bacteroids in our gut. We also have this collection of bacteria called proteobacteria. And we all have it, but it should be in small amounts. And usually these are bacteria that we would consider not so friendly, not so great, especially when they grow out of control. In small amounts, they're okay. But when we eat a lot of refined sugars, these proteobacteria feed very quickly on refined sugars and grow out of control, whereas your bacteroids feed on complex carbohydrates. So they will start to starve because the proteobacteria is using up all of that quick, fast sugar, right? So this can cause that shift where we no longer have a balance in how many bacteroids versus proteobacteria. And there's research now that's demonstrating that it's probably a ratio between those two, maintaining a balance between those two, that's really important for maintaining lower levels of inflammation, a healthy immune system, healthy neurochemistry, all of those things. So, sugar intake can really lead to that shift that causes a decrease in immune function, an increase in inflammation, and also a decreased capacity to regulate your intestinal barrier, which means we're more likely to get leaky gut. So I have had people come to me after traveling and they said, I felt fine until I started traveling. And then all of a sudden, I started having all of these gut issues. Well, oftentimes that's because we had a sort of triggering event. Maybe this was kind of playing in the background and our body was keeping it under control. And then this period of time where we were completely doing something different, we're not giving our gut what it needed to maintain barrier integrity, to help regulate the immune system, that kind of threw everything out of control. So, what I will say is if you're doing a good job in your daily life of maintaining balance and living a healthy lifestyle and ideally a really good nutrition, traveling and changing what you eat for a few weeks is not going to make a big difference. If you're not feeling very well and you're not taking great care of yourself, and then you go travel, you might be right on the edge where that travel puts your body over the edge and it can no longer keep everything in balance anymore. So that is something to consider when you're thinking about what you're going to eat and what you're going to do while you're on vacation. Now, if you're like us and you're traveling for longer periods of time, so often we travel for a few months. This time we're embarking on probably 2.5 months of travel. We know that can have a much larger impact on our gut microbiome. So, doing something for a week or a couple of weeks is very different than doing something for a few months. And we don't want to have that long-term impact on the gut. So that's something for us to keep in mind as we're traveling, especially if you're someone who likes to travel like we do and you're fast traveling. It's very easy to feel excited about this new place you're in and want to eat all the things and do all the things when ultimately we're probably hurting ourselves if we maintain that for a long period of time. So we have to be a little bit more thoughtful about, okay, maybe for the first week we're in somewhere, we give ourselves permission to just go live, experience, eat all the things, eat in restaurants, something like that. And then after that first week, we really dial it in and start to think about, okay, how do we get back into a routine that's really nourishing, that's really making our body happy and not making it struggle. So that's that interesting balance between the positive collection of bacteria we have in our gut and then what can grow out of balance, which is this proteobacteria. Uh, That is an interesting factor. The other piece that we were going to touch on is like the traveler's diarrhea. Usually, when that happens, it's actually more of a pathological bacteria. So, something that's really causing issues for someone. Maybe it's something in the food, maybe it's something in the water, something that really upset the gut microbiome. So, that's not as common. And that can cause that same sort of temporary shift in the gut. Sometimes it's longer term, again, if your body's not really in a good balanced place to begin with. But that is different than the shifts we see, for example, just eating a lot of sugar while you're on vacation. So at the end of this little bout of research I did, the question is, okay, so if I'm going to go on a week-long vacation and I'm going to eat all the things and just let myself have permission to do everything I want, live everything, eat everything I want, how do I quickly bring everything back into balance? And specifically, how do I do this for my children? Because I think their little bodies are very resilient, but we know that by the age of about, I think it's 5, our children have peaked in a microbiome biodiversity. So the more we can do to nourish their microbiome early on is going to set them up for success longer. And everything we do now that has a long-term effect on their gut is something that we should really think hard about before we do. So thinking about this, This gives me peace of mind because I can say, okay, I can let her have ice cream this week without feeling worried or stressed about this long-term effect on her gut. But this other part of my brain is also thinking, well, what can I do quickly to help her bring that back into balance once we leave this particular environment, or even while we're here, if it fits into our life? Are there things I can kind of look out for? So, one thing, of course, is if you're going to have sugar, then make sure you're also having those complex carbohydrates, the fruits, the veggies, the um, things like much more a stronger prebiotic concentration, right? Like garlic, onions, leeks, asparagus, things that are a lot heartier that are going to feed the good microbiome. That can be really helpful because if we have complex or refined sugars, that's feeding the proteobacteria. But remember, we want a balance between the two. So we don't want to starve the good bacteria. So if we're going to have sugar, we should also have complex carbs that are going to feed the good bacteria so that at least they hopefully grow somewhat in proportion to each other. The other thing we can do is try to bring in fermented foods whenever we see them. So, if you happen to magically be traveling in Germany, that's a great place to eat sauerkraut. Just keep having sauerkraut with all of your meals if possible, or at least once a day. That's going to help make sure that you're getting a lot of that prebiotic, probiotic that's going to continue to nourish the gut. Same thing pretty much anywhere you're traveling, find whatever is local and fermented. Almost all cultures have some sort of local fermented food, and that's going to really help make sure that we're maintaining that healthy gut microbiome. So, yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, pickles, in some cultures, kombucha, things like that. There's a lot of fermented soy in Asia. Those are all going to be really, really great for maintaining that gut microbiome happiness. Once you're back at home and you're done with your vacation and you're thinking, okay, it's time to reset, there's a couple of specific things that I think can be really helpful. One is giving your gut a rest overnight. So 12 hours of fasting if possible. This is probably not reasonable for our children, although sometimes if they're sleeping 12 hours a night, they're going to naturally get a 12-hour fast. But for us, really stopping eating in the evening and then waiting 12 hours before we eat in the morning, that's going to be excellent to help reset the gut microbiome and bring everything back into balance faster. A lot of the same things that we just talked about. So, focusing on fermented foods, polyphenols, so everything that's in all of your brightly colored fruits and veggies. Blueberries, cherries, strawberries, plums, all of those have really, really great polyphenols in them and antioxidants that are going to help our gut. We want to have increased fiber intake, so 30 grams a day. This specifically is a time where I might actually track to see how much fiber I'm getting post vacation. And if I'm noticing that it's a lot lower than 30 grams a day, I may actively try to boost that for a week or a couple of weeks to help reset everything. That's a good goal for always. 30 grams a day. I think almost none of us are getting that much. But especially in a time when we know that our body's taken a little bit of a toll, it's a great time to boost this in aspect of our nutrition. Then we also have prebiotics, as I talked about. So things like onion, leek, asparagus, artichoke, beans, if you tolerate them okay, beets, nuts and seeds, those are all really great prebiotics. And then we have our probiotics. So um, fermented foods, yogurt, kimchi, all of that type of thing. And those, if you can get that in with every single meal once you go home, that's a really great way to reset. Now, the one caveat to fermented foods is if you have health issues that you're consistently dealing with that are unresolved, you're not really sure why they're happening. For example, maybe you have a lot of PMS or bloating or kind of like period-like symptoms right around ovulation, or you have a lot of unresolved gut issues, or you have a lot of bloating and you've had a lot of bloating forever and it's never been resolved. Those are certain types of symptoms that don't necessarily go very well with fermented foods. So you have to self-test if you're not tolerating them very well. Initially, for the first few days, sometimes there's an increase in kind of gut symptoms, and then usually they should decrease. But if you're consistently not tolerating them, then it's time to go find someone who can help you figure out what's really happening and get to the root of that, because unfortunately, probiotics are probably not going to help if they're not helping in the beginning. They may make things worse for a little while. So that is my brain download for the day. That's what I've been thinking about as we've been here in Madrid, just eating and drinking and exploring and having a lovely time, but not eating what we normally would, and definitely probably not getting enough fiber or fermented foods and way too many sugar and way too much carbs. But that's okay as long as we bring it back down next week or in the next couple weeks. So I hope that was interesting and helpful, and I will see you in the next one.